There are stories about the end of kingdoms, stories about cities consumed by fire, about empires collapsing beneath their own pride, and about kings who watched their thrones fall beneath invading armies. But there are no stories about the end of mankind. No bard remained to sing them. No priest survived to write them. No historian lived long enough to remember how the final age ended. Only one man walked beneath the dying sun. Conan had outlived kings. He had outlived nations. He had even outlived the gods that men once begged for mercy. For years he crossed a silent world where no smoke rose from distant villages, and no voices answered the sound of his footsteps. Rivers still flowed, the wind still moved through the dead forests, and the stars still appeared every night above the ruins of forgotten civilizations. But mankind itself had vanished. And somewhere beneath those ruined lands, in places older than memory itself, something ancient had remained awake. It had watched the first cities rise from the wilderness. It had watched empires spread across the earth. It had watched every generation of men believe themselves immortal. And when the final kingdom fell into dust, it simply continued waiting, not for armies, not for kings, but for the last man still walking beneath the dying sky. That man was Conan. The road had once connected three great kingdoms. Conan remembered that much. Many years earlier, caravans had traveled its stone surface carrying gold, silk, spices, and slaves between distant cities. Soldiers had marched along it beneath colorful banners, while merchants argued in crowded inns built beside its edges. Entire armies had once passed through these lands, and ambitious kings had spent fortunes to keep the road repaired. Now only the wind traveled there. The ancient stones had cracked apart beneath countless winters. Grass grew through the broken surface, and entire sections had disappeared beneath drifting earth. The milestones that once guided travelers had fallen and become little more than weathered shapes lying beside the path. Conan followed the old road because roads still carried memory. Even when men vanished, roads remembered where they had once led. The giant Cimmerian walked slowly beneath a gray sky, his heavy fur cloak hanging from his broad shoulders while cold winds moved through his dark hair. Time had marked him, but it had not diminished him. He remained tall, powerful, and imposing, his movements possessing the same dangerous grace that had once terrified warriors and kings alike. In his hands rested the double-bladed axe that had become his constant companion. The weapon was enormous, forged long ago by hands that no longer existed. Its steel had darkened with age, but its edges remained keen. Conan carried it naturally, as another man might carry a walking stick, though anyone foolish enough to approach him would immediately understand that the axe was never far from striking. Years of solitude had changed him. He no longer slept deeply. He no longer trusted silence. He moved through the world as a great predator moves through unfamiliar territory, every sense alert, every shadow examined, every sound measured. Even though no men remained, his body still expected danger, perhaps because danger had never truly disappeared. The sun was already descending when he reached the remains of a village. A handful of stone houses stood beside a dried well. Most of their roofs had collapsed years earlier, and vines covered the walls. The doors had long since rotted away, allowing the wind to pass freely through empty rooms. Conan entered the settlement cautiously. His axe remained in his hands. Something about the place disturbed him, not because it was dead. Everything was dead, but because it felt recently abandoned. A wooden cup still rested upon a table inside one house. A chair had fallen beside a cold fireplace. In another building, he found blankets lying across a bed frame that had partially collapsed beneath dust. It was as if people had simply stood up one day and walked away. He had seen other villages like this. Too many. Entire cities where meals remained untouched. Castles whose gates still stood open. Temples where candles had burned themselves into pools of hardened wax. The world had not died in war. It had emptied. That frightened him more than battle ever had. As darkness approached, Conan entered the largest building in the village and built a small fire. Dry timber still remained inside the structure, protected from rain and wind. The flames brought warmth but little comfort. Outside, the village remained silent. No dogs barked. No insects sang. No owls called from the trees. Only the wind moved. Conan sat beside the fire, with the axe resting across his knees. For a long time he stared into the flames. He thought about kingdoms that no longer existed. He thought about faces he had forgotten. He thought about battles that no longer mattered. Years ago he had searched for survivors. He had traveled from city to city, hoping to find another human voice. Eventually he had stopped looking. The world had become too large for one man to search. The silence had become too complete. And yet, on that particular night, as the fire slowly burned lower and shadows gathered inside the ruined hall, Conan experienced something he had not felt in many years. He felt that he was no longer alone, not fear. Not exactly, but the unmistakable sensation that somewhere beyond the walls, beyond the darkness, something had become aware of him. His fingers tightened around the handle of the axe. His body rose instinctively. Every muscle became tense. His posture changed immediately, becoming almost animal-like, the stance of a predator prepared to kill whatever entered its territory. The fire crackled. The wind stopped. And from somewhere beneath the earth itself, so distant that it could hardly be called a sound, Conan heard something. Not a voice, not words, yet somehow he understood it. Something had spoken his name, and for the first time in many years the last man alive realized that something else still walked the dying world. The sound did not come again. For several moments Conan remained motionless beside the dying fire, his massive hands wrapped tightly around the shaft of his double-bladed axe. The ruined hall around him had become perfectly still. Even the wind that had moved through the empty village all evening had suddenly disappeared, leaving behind a silence so complete that he could hear the soft crack of burning wood inside the fireplace. He had heard strange things during his life. He had listened to the whispers of dying sorcerers, to the prayers of priests whose gods had abandoned them, and to the terrible voices that sometimes emerged from forgotten places beneath ancient ruins. Many men had lost their sanity after hearing such things. Conan had survived them, but this was different. The sound had not entered his ears. It had risen from somewhere deep inside his own mind, as if the earth itself had spoken through stone and darkness. Slowly he stepped toward the broken doorway. The night outside seemed colder than before. The ruined houses stood beneath a sky covered with pale clouds, and the empty streets stretched between them like dark wounds crossing the village. Nothing moved. Yet Conan could not rid himself of the feeling that something had awakened. He walked into the street. His heavy fur cloak shifted against his broad shoulders, while the cold air moved through his dark hair. The great axe rested across his chest, both hands gripping the weapon firmly. His entire body had changed. His muscles remained tight, his breathing slow and controlled, his eyes constantly searching the darkness. He resembled a hunting beast more than a man. Any creature foolish enough to approach him would have found no hesitation in him. For several minutes he examined the village, the abandoned well, the broken roofs, the collapsed walls, the empty streets. Nothing, and yet the feeling remained. He knelt beside the center of the road and touched the earth. The ground felt strangely warm. Conan frowned. The night had become cold enough for frost to gather upon the stones, yet beneath his fingers the soil carried a faint heat, as though something deep below still lived. He stood again. Far beyond the village, beyond the dead fields and the dark hills to the north, he noticed something that had not been there before. A light, not fire, not lightning. A pale red glow far away upon the horizon. It appeared only for a moment before disappearing. Then it returned, slow, pulsing, almost like the heartbeat of some enormous creature hidden beneath the world. Conan watched it for a long time. The old instincts that had guided him through countless wars began speaking once more. Throughout his life he had learned to trust those instincts. They had saved him from assassins, monsters, kings, and sorcerers. Now they told him something simple: do not go there. But the years had changed him. When a man becomes the last living soul in the world, fear loses much of its power. There are no kingdoms left to protect, no families to return to, no armies waiting behind him. Only roads, only silence, only questions. He returned to the ruined hall and sat beside the fire again, though he did not sleep. Throughout the night he felt the strange warmth beneath the earth. Several times he thought he heard movement beneath the village itself, not footsteps above the ground, but something much deeper. A distant grinding sound, as though immense stones slowly shifted in darkness far below. The stars disappeared behind clouds. Hours passed. Then, just before dawn, he heard the voice again. Conan. This time it was clearer. Not loud, not threatening, ancient. The words seemed to come from every direction at once. The walls, the floor, the earth, the mountains. Conan rose instantly. His axe came into his hands. He lowered his body slightly, assuming the stance he had used during countless battles, every muscle prepared to strike. He looked like a great predator cornered in its den, ready to kill whatever approached. But there was nothing, only silence, only the dying fire. And then, from outside the ruined building, came another sound. Footsteps. Conan turned. No man had walked these lands for years. The sound came slowly through the street. One step, then another. The Cimmerian moved toward the doorway. The pale light of dawn had begun spreading across the horizon. The village remained empty, yet the footsteps continued. He followed them into the street. The sound moved ahead of him, invisible, measured, almost as though one walked only a few paces beyond his sight. Conan advanced cautiously. The unseen footsteps passed beside the old well. They crossed the center of the village. They continued northward toward the distant hills where the strange red light had appeared. Then they stopped. The silence returned. Conan stood alone. The wind slowly returned to the village. Dust moved through the streets. Far above, the clouds began to separate. For several minutes he remained motionless. Then he looked toward the northern horizon. The faint red glow had returned. This time it remained. It pulsed beneath the hills like a distant fire, buried under the world. Conan understood. Whatever had called him waited there. He did not know whether it was a god, a demon, or something older than both. He did not know whether it wished to kill him. He did not know why it had spoken his name, but he knew one thing. The world was not empty, and if another presence still existed beneath the dying sky, he intended to face it. He gathered his few belongings as the sun rose. The fire had died completely. The abandoned village remained silent behind him. Before leaving, Conan turned one final time and studied the empty streets. Once men had lived there. Children had laughed there. Women had sung there. Now only dust remained. If mankind truly had ended, then he carried its final memory. And if some ancient thing beneath the earth had waited through the death of every kingdom, then perhaps his lone road had always been leading toward it. He adjusted the fur cloak upon his shoulders. The double-bladed axe rested across his back. Then he began walking north, toward the hills, toward the strange light, toward the voice that had spoken his name. And as he disappeared into the gray morning, the unseen presence beneath the world seemed to awaken a little more. If this tale of Conan's final journey has found you beside our fire tonight, then walk with us into the darkness. Subscribe to Shadows of Cimmeria, where forgotten kingdoms, ancient horrors, and the last legends of the Hyborian age still live. Because some stories do not die, they simply wait to be remembered. The northern hills appeared closer than they truly were. Throughout the morning, Conan walked beneath a sky the color of old iron, crossing fields that had once fed entire kingdoms. Long ago, farmers had worked this land from sunrise until darkness, and roads filled with wagons had carried grain toward distant cities that no longer existed. Now the earth had returned to silence. Dry grass moved in the wind, broken fences leaned beneath their own weight, and abandoned farms slowly disappeared beneath years of neglect. The great Cimmerian advanced steadily across the empty country. His fur cloak hung heavily upon his broad shoulders, protecting him from the cold wind that swept down from the north. The double-bladed axe rested in his hands more often than across his back. During his years alone, he had learned never to trust silence. Even after mankind vanished, the world had never become entirely empty. Several times he stopped and examined the ground. Tracks, not human. The marks appeared enormous, pressed deeply into the earth as though something immensely heavy had crossed the fields. Yet the footprints possessed no clear shape. The edges seemed strangely smooth, almost melted, and each impression descended far deeper than any natural creature should have been capable of making. The tracks all moved north, toward the hills, toward the red light. Conan followed. By midday he reached the remains of an old watchtower built upon a rise overlooking the countryside. Half of the structure had collapsed, leaving only fragments of stone walls exposed to centuries of wind and rain. Once soldiers had stood there watching for enemies approaching from the wilderness. Now only crows remained. Several black birds watched him from the broken walls. They did not flee as he approached. That disturbed him. Animals had become rare during the long years after mankind disappeared. Many species had simply vanished. Others had retreated into forests and mountains far from the ruins of civilization. Yet these birds remained, sitting silently upon the ancient stones. Watching, Conan climbed the ruined tower. From its highest surviving section, he could finally see the northern hills clearly, and beyond them, far in the distance, stood something impossible. At first he believed it to be a mountain, but mountains did not possess perfect angles. Mountains did not rise from the earth in enormous black shapes that seemed almost carved. Something stood beyond the hills, something colossal. Even from such a distance it appeared immense. The upper portion disappeared inside low clouds while the lower sections remained hidden behind the rolling landscape. A fortress, a temple, a city. Conan could not tell. He had crossed many kingdoms throughout his life, had seen towers raised by forgotten empires, and temples dedicated to dark gods. Yet he had never witnessed a structure of such size. More troubling still was the red light. It pulsed from somewhere beneath that distant monument, slow, steady, like the beating heart of the world itself. The crows suddenly took flight. Every bird rose simultaneously into the sky. Conan immediately turned. His hand tightened around the axe. He sensed it before he saw it. Movement. Far below the tower, something stood among the dead grass. The figure appeared human at first glance. Tall, thin, motionless. It stood perhaps 100 paces away. Conan descended the broken tower without hesitation. The axe rested in both hands. His body lowered slightly into a fighting stance, every muscle prepared for violence. He moved like a hunting animal, approaching dangerous prey, balanced and controlled, his eyes fixed entirely upon the stranger. When he reached the ground, the figure remained still. Its clothing hung in dark strips. Its head lowered, its arms rested at its sides. A man, or what had once been a man. Conan approached slowly. 20 paces. 10, 5. The figure lifted its head. Its face had become little more than dried skin stretched across bone. The eyes had collapsed into dark cavities. The mouth hung partially open. The corpse had been dead for years, yet it stood. For several seconds neither moved. The dead man stared at him. Conan stared back. Then the corpse spoke, not with its own voice. The sound that emerged belonged to something ancient and distant. "You have come." The words echoed strangely, as if multiple voices spoke simultaneously through the ruined body. Conan did not lower his axe. "Who speaks?" he asked. The corpse slowly turned its head toward the northern hills. "The last one." Conan frowned. "What are you?" The dead figure remained silent. Its empty eyes returned toward him. For the first time in many years, the Cimmerian felt something close to unease. The corpse spoke again. "It waits." The body collapsed. The bones shattered against the ground. The dry flesh turned to dust. Within moments, nothing remained except torn clothing moving gently in the wind. Conan stood motionless. He had faced sorcery before. He had fought demons. He had entered temples where reality itself seemed to bend beneath ancient powers. Yet this felt older, far older. He looked once more toward the distant black structure. The red glow continued to pulse, waiting, watching, calling. As evening approached, he entered the northern hills. The landscape changed immediately. The grass disappeared, the soil darkened. Ancient stones emerged from the earth like broken teeth. The wind itself seemed quieter there. No birds flew overhead. No animals moved among the rocks. Even the air felt different. And beneath his boots, faint but unmistakable, Conan felt vibrations. The earth trembled. Not violently, not continuously, but like the distant heartbeat of some immense sleeping creature buried beneath the world. He camped that night among a circle of fallen stones, no fire, no light, only the stars above. The axe rested across his knees. His eyes remained fixed upon the distant monument. Hours passed. The red light brightened, and sometime after midnight, while the world lay silent around him, Conan realized something terrifying. The monument was larger than he had believed, much larger, because it was no longer hidden by distance. It had moved. Before we continue this journey into the dying world, subscribe to Shadows of Cimmeria and walk beside Conan through forgotten kingdoms, ancient horrors, and the final days of mankind itself. The fire still burns here, and the old stories have not yet ended. Conan rose before dawn. For several moments he remained perfectly still, studying the northern horizon. The enormous shape remained there, black, silent, impossible. But he knew with absolute certainty that it had changed its position. The previous evening the structure had stood beyond a distant ridge. Now it appeared closer, emerging farther above the hills than before. He narrowed his eyes. Perhaps exhaustion had deceived him. Perhaps the strange landscape distorted distance. Yet deep within himself he knew otherwise. Something enormous had moved during the night. The Cimmerian gathered his belongings. The fur cloak settled across his shoulders, while the great double-bladed axe returned to his hands. His posture remained tense. Every instinct that had kept him alive through decades of warfare screamed that danger surrounded him. The hills became steeper. Dark stone covered the slopes. Ancient ruins appeared among the rocks, columns, walls, fragments of roads, all older than any kingdom Conan remembered. Some had stood for thousands of years. Others appeared almost melted, as if exposed to impossible heat. Throughout the morning he discovered statues, hundreds of them. They lined the hills in broken rows. Each depicted human figures kneeling toward the north. Men, women, children, kings, warriors, all facing the distant black monument. Many statues had lost their faces. Others had cracked apart, but every one of them knelt. Conan examined one carefully. The stone was ancient, far older than the kingdoms that had once ruled these lands. Who had carved them? Who had they worshipped? And why had an entire civilization turned toward the north? He continued walking. Around midday, he reached a valley hidden between the hills. There he discovered something that caused him to stop. An army. Thousands of skeletons covered the valley floor. Rusting armor still clung to bones. Broken weapons lay scattered among the dead. Banners had rotted away long ago. The army had fallen where it stood. No signs of battle remained. No defensive positions, no enemy dead. Only thousands of warriors lying exactly where they had marched. Conan moved carefully among them. He recognized several styles of armor. Some belonged to kingdoms that had vanished centuries apart. Others came from civilizations even older. Armies from different ages, different peoples, different centuries, all gathered in the same valley, all facing north, all dead. He stopped beside the skeleton of a giant warrior whose armor had nearly rusted away. The man still gripped his weapon. The skull looked upward, frozen, as if he had died staring at something towering above him. Conan slowly followed that gaze. The black monument had become visible again, and for the first time he understood his mistake. It was not a fortress. It was not a mountain. It was not a city. The shape possessed shoulders, arms, a head. The enormous figure stood upon the horizon. Its lower body disappeared behind distant hills, while its upper portion vanished into clouds. A giant? No, something larger than any giant. Something impossible. And it was walking. Very slowly. So slowly that entire civilizations might have risen and fallen before men realized it had moved. One step. Perhaps every century. Another step. Perhaps every age. Conan stood among the dead army. His grip tightened upon the axe. The creature faced south, toward the dead world, toward him, and somewhere beneath the ground the great heartbeat continued. The earth trembled. The red light pulsed. Then the voice returned, not from the sky, not from the giant, from below. "You have arrived." Conan turned instantly. His body lowered, his feet shifted. The axe came forward. He stood like a great predator, preparing to attack, every muscle ready to explode into violence. No enemy stood nearby. Yet he knew the speaker remained close. "What are you?" Conan demanded. The answer came slowly. The witness. The heartbeat beneath the earth grew stronger. The red glow spread between cracks in the rocks. And for the first time in years, the last man alive understood something terrifying. The end of mankind had not happened by accident. Someone had been waiting for it, and that someone had finally called him home. If you wish to hear the rest of Conan's final journey beneath the dying sun, subscribe to Shadows of Cimmeria, because beyond these hills waits something older than gods, and the last man in the world has only just begun to understand why he survived. Conan did not leave the Valley of the Dead. For a long time he stood among the countless skeletons, surrounded by warriors who had marched from forgotten kingdoms toward the northern hills and had never returned. Their armor had rusted away. Their banners had become dust. Entire nations had disappeared, yet their soldiers still remained where death had found them. The giant shape upon the horizon had not moved again, at least not enough for human eyes to perceive. It stood against the gray sky like a mountain that had somehow learned to walk, its enormous silhouette disappearing into the clouds above the hills. Even at such a distance, its presence dominated the entire landscape. Conan had faced creatures of immense size before. He had fought beasts from forgotten ages and witnessed horrors summoned by ancient sorcerers. Yet nothing he had encountered during his long life compared to the impossible scale of the thing that now waited in the north. The earth trembled beneath his feet, not violently, not enough to throw stones from the hills, but steadily, like the pulse of a living heart hidden deep below the world. Conan began moving once more. The valley narrowed as he advanced northward. Black stone walls rose on either side, and strange carvings appeared upon their surfaces. Time had nearly erased them, but some remained visible. They showed enormous figures standing above kneeling crowds. Towers reached toward strange stars. Oceans boiled beneath unfamiliar moons, and everywhere the same symbol appeared, a circle divided by a single vertical line. Conan had never seen it before. The farther he walked, the warmer the air became. The cold wind disappeared. The smell of dust gave way to something older, something buried. The scent reminded him of caves sealed for centuries, of forgotten tombs and abandoned temples. The hills gradually opened into a vast basin surrounded by cliffs. And there, hidden beneath the earth itself, lay an entire city. Conan stopped. The city extended farther than he could see. Countless towers rose from the darkness below. Bridges crossed enormous streets. Great domes stood half-collapsed beneath centuries of neglect. Black stone buildings filled the basin from one side to the other. No city from the Hyborian kingdoms had ever approached such size. Even in ruin, it appeared impossible. The red light rose from its center, deep below the streets, deep beneath the foundations. Something pulsed there, something alive. Conan descended carefully. Ancient stairs carved directly into the rock led downward toward the dead city. Many had cracked or collapsed, forcing him to move slowly. The axe remained in his hands. His body stayed tense, prepared to strike at the slightest movement. Years of solitude had sharpened his instincts beyond those of ordinary men. He moved like a predator entering another predator's territory. Every shadow mattered. Every sound mattered. When he finally reached the streets below, he discovered something strange. The city had not fallen through war. There were no signs of destruction, no burned buildings, no shattered walls, no evidence of battle. The inhabitants had simply vanished. Thousands of homes stood open. Tables remained inside them. Beds still existed. Tools rested where they had been left. Entire lives had been abandoned. Conan entered one of the buildings. The room contained shelves carved from black stone. Strange objects rested upon them, covered by centuries of dust. Symbols decorated the walls. At the center of the chamber stood several stone chairs, and upon those chairs sat skeletons. 5 of them. Their bones had turned almost white with age. Each remained seated exactly where death had taken them. No weapons, no wounds, no struggle. The city had died peacefully. That disturbed Conan more than violence ever could. He left the chamber. The streets stretched endlessly around him. Silence covered everything. Yet the strange feeling returned. He was being watched. He stopped. His hands tightened upon the handle of the double-bladed axe. His shoulders lowered. His stance changed instantly. Like a wolf preparing to attack. Like a great beast warning others to stay away. His eyes searched the darkness between the ruined buildings. Nothing. Then movement. Far ahead, several figures crossed one of the streets. Human shapes, thin, silent. Conan immediately advanced. The figures disappeared. He increased his pace. The empty street opened into a massive square. Hundreds of statues surrounded it. Every statue faced the center. Every statue knelt. And there, rising from the black stone floor, stood a shaft descending into darkness. A hole, perfectly circular, perhaps 50 feet wide. The red light came from below. The heartbeat grew stronger. The entire city seemed to breathe with it. Conan approached the edge. He looked down. The shaft descended beyond sight. Far below, red light moved through enormous chambers hidden beneath the city. And then the voice returned, closer than before. "You have reached the gate." Conan spoke into the darkness. "What waits below?" For several moments nothing answered. Then the ancient voice said, "The one who remained." The heartbeat grew louder. The ground trembled. Dust fell from the surrounding buildings, and somewhere deep beneath the earth, something enormous began to move. If these forgotten roads and dead kingdoms still call to you, then join us here at Shadows of Cimmeria. Subscribe and walk beside Conan through ancient ruins, cosmic horrors, and the final legends of the dying world. Because the old stories are waiting in the dark. The sound rising from below was unlike anything Conan had ever heard. It was not the movement of stone. It was not thunder. It was not the roar of some enormous beast. The noise resembled an entire mountain awakening after sleeping for thousands of years. The red glow brightened. The vast shaft beneath the city filled with moving light. The black stones surrounding the opening began to vibrate. Conan stepped backward. His axe rose before him, his feet planted firmly against the ancient floor. The fur cloak hanging from his shoulders moved slightly as warm air rose from the depths below. Something was coming. Throughout his long life, Conan had stood against impossible enemies. He had fought sorcerers whose words could kill. He had battled creatures hidden beneath forgotten temples. He had survived wars that destroyed kingdoms. But at that moment he felt something he had not experienced since he was a young warrior. He felt small. The city itself seemed built around the shaft, the streets, the temples, the towers. Everything faced this place. Everything had been constructed around whatever existed below. The people who built this city had not worshipped the heavens. They had worshipped the depths. The heartbeat became louder, slower, stronger. The entire basin trembled. Cracks appeared across the stone. Ancient statues collapsed. The kneeling figures shattered against the ground. And then Conan saw movement far below. At first he could not understand what he was seeing. The scale was too great. A shadow moved through the red light. Something larger than the largest palace ever built. Something that filled entire chambers beneath the earth. One enormous eye slowly opened. Conan froze. The eye alone appeared larger than a castle tower. Golden, ancient, filled with an age beyond imagination. The creature did not rise. It remained far below. Its gaze simply found him. And for the first time since mankind disappeared, another intelligence looked directly into Conan's eyes. The voice spoke, not through the air, not through sound, directly within his mind. "You are the last," Conan answered without fear. "What are you?" The eye remained motionless. I watched the first fire. The red light moved beneath the earth. I watched the first kings. The heartbeat echoed through the city. I watched your kind build their kingdoms. Dust fell from the towers, and I watched them disappear. Conan stood firm. The axe remained ready. Every muscle remained prepared. Even before a being older than civilizations, the Cimmerian refused to kneel. The voice continued. "You alone remain." Conan asked the question that had haunted him for years. "Why?" The answer came slowly. "Because you continued." Images suddenly filled his mind. Cities burning, wars, plagues, empty roads, silent kingdoms. Humanity had not died from one disaster. It had slowly faded, century after century, kingdom after kingdom, until only one man remained walking beneath the sky, Conan. The ancient being spoke again. "You fought. Images of battles appeared. You endured years of wandering. You refused surrender, countless roads. You became the witness." Conan finally understood. The creature had not preserved him. It had watched him for years, perhaps for centuries. The last man had never truly been alone. The eye remained fixed upon him. Then the ancient voice asked, "Will your kind end here?" Conan looked upward, beyond the broken city, beyond the dead hills. toward the gray sky covering the world. He thought of kingdoms, of friends, of enemies, of women he had loved, of kings he had defeated, of all the lives that had vanished. He tightened his grip upon the axe. The great double-bladed weapon rested before him. He stood tall, imposing, unbroken, the final warrior of mankind. No, the answer echoed through the ancient city. The heartbeat stopped. The red light dimmed. For the first time in thousands of years, the enormous eye closed, and the voice spoke one final time. Then walk, the earth became still, the warmth disappeared. The ancient presence retreated into darkness. The city fell silent. Conan remained alone once more, but something had changed. The last man now carried the memory of an entire species. He climbed from the dead city. He crossed the northern hills. He passed through the valley of skeletons, and far upon the horizon the giant figure that had walked since forgotten ages no longer stood there. The world remained dead. The kingdoms remained dust. But the road still existed, and Conan walked it. His fur cloak rested upon his shoulders. His double-bladed axe remained in his hands. His eyes still searched the horizon, and somewhere beneath the dying world, ancient things returned to sleep. For the first time in many years, the last man alive was no longer searching for survivors. He was searching for tomorrow. If you enjoyed this journey through the end of mankind, subscribe to Shadows of Cimmeria and continue walking beside Conan through forgotten kingdoms, ancient horrors and legends buried beneath the Hyborian age. Because as long as stories survive, mankind is never truly gone. And somewhere beyond the next horizon, another fire still waits to be found.